Hello, I'm Joatan Praisutra, and this video is for my virtual presentation for the article titled Building Guidelines for UNESCO World Heritage Site Apps. If you enjoyed this presentation, if you like the article, you can continue this conversation with my email that will be in my first page and the last one. So let's go for the presentation. Continuing. So this is the article titled Building Guidelines for UNESCO World Heritage Sites Apps. And I'm part of two institutions, so I'm completing my PhD at the Bauhaus University in Weimar, in Germany. And also I'm a lecturer part of the Leicester Media School at the Montfort University in the United Kingdom. So before going to the topic, let's just talk a little bit about what UNESCO World Heritage Sites are. So it's a convention that was implemented in 1972. And when you see here in the map, you can see now in the screen, is spread around the globe. And if you collect the top 5 countries, are Italy, China, Spain, France, and Germany. So this research was placed in Germany, which makes an ideal scenario for using UNESCO World Heritage Sites. This UNESCO heritage sites, they go into cultural sites and natural sites, and in this research, they are just considering the cultural sites. And even when you think about just the cultural sites, you have different also profiles, if you like. Let's say you can talk about church, castles, palaces, former factories, historical town centers, or the World Heritage Sites. So what you apply in Weimar was more related to historical town centers. And Weimar is one of the places in Germany that has 2 actually World Heritage Sites. They have one that's related to Bauhaus. So it's basically these 3 buildings here you can see on the screen. But also they have what's called Classical Weimar. So here we talk about 10 different locations. And sometimes one location can have more than 1 buildings. So when you combine Classic Weimar to Bauhaus, and then you can have a lot of locations which brings with a similar profile, which is more than 1 building, monument in the city. They need to move through the city, or meaning you need directions and getting cultural information regarding each monument and access further information about each point of interest. So for this research, this apply a methodology of collecting guidelines from different profiles, one based on the industry, another one based on literature review, and then creating prototypes to test in order to collect a better recommendations for future appliances. So just think about the industry here. I'm talking about apps that exist in the German scenario. So what's used? Quantitative data about the features, what kind of elements they're applying, what kind of articles and media they're offering for the audience, and then also the qualitative data about these apps. I'm just talking about the German scenario. And then after doing this expert-based evaluation, and then you got the set of mobile guidelines based on the industry and market. And here, use these guidelines to create a prototype that was called RED. And about apps that was used in this research, you talk about in July of 2018, was select already 29 apps. And here I'm talking about dedicated apps. It's not just generic apps or as a tourism, but apps that were developed especially for each or for the World Heritage Site they meant to. And here talk about some about virtual reality, others based on audio, based on GPS. So it was a lot of different profiles. One more very professionals, other very amateur, if you like. And then also you collect also another guidelines that was based on academic literature review and what studies are you talking about, which is the best way to deal with app guidelines or usability or tourist guides. And was searching use such a string as mobile usability plus guidelines plus app plus heritage plus travel guide plus city guide, apps guidelines, mobile interface guidelines, and then was selected the first 50 results from the that was related or relevant for these search strings from the last 5 years. And then from each platform, for each string, was collected the first 50 results. And then based on their keywords that was presented in the documents, they generate this word cloud that I'm showing here on the screen that's very focused on app and usability and mobile context and mobile tourism. Just to see how the topics that goes around from this literature review. And also you have these two set of guidelines, one based on the apps, another one based on the literature, was building two different prototypes using, of course, the same target that was the UNESCO World Heritage Environment, but using a different interface elements to test what was common on the market, on the industry, in contrast of what is offered in the literature review. Sometimes some guidelines was the same, so it's not that you have two different worlds, but you have a lot of subtle changes that was meant to be tested. And so basically, the main methodology here was having two prototypes using different guidelines, and then having user testing for it was used from 30 testers from different countries. Some people were familiar with Weimar, some people were never been there. And then you have the results, and then comparing what was considering successful threshold, and then in the end you have the app guidelines for open air cultural heritage sites. What will be actually the interface that you recommend after this one? So in the article that you can find at in the ARIA conference, you're going to find out the methodology that was applied for the evaluation in details. So I'm here in this presentation, I just want to focus on the features and interface recommendations for apps dealing with this. So why is it important to actually develop a dedicated app instead of why not just stick to the touristic ones? The main thing is that you control the narrative. So you can see a lot of touristic apps that just collecting this long text from Wikipedia. So there's no proper curation about how to deal with the content, how to deal with the locations. So then you have a more tailored information, and then also your design is taking consideration the profile of tourists you have in your area. So let's say take consideration age and content and languages, and also offering more tailored features such as tours or customized maps, articles, or even services as a guided tour, tickets to museums. So there's a lot of ways you can add information in your official app for your cultural heritage place. So from the categories, the first one is about the layout, and here is not about the cosmetics, but it's about the structure. So what kind of elements you should consider when implementing your design. So the most important thing is always try to concentrate in one screen. So minimize avoiding scrolling, because here what we're going to talk about open air scenarios. So people are walking through the city using your app to go from A to B to C to D. So sometimes you need to present a more quick information, of course, with the possibility to explore it. So it's very important to, as much as possible, to concentrate your content in one screen and not having scrolling. And also be consistent between the different sections. So it's very common to see some apps that they have one design in one page and then you change, they have another one with a different background, and sometimes it's confusing. So try to use the same style along your sessions. And also it's very important to provide a session title to show where you are inside the app, especially if you talk about different locations, you talk about a lot of information that's gonna pop up in your screen. So it's very good to have always provide a session title to show, okay, I'm here now, so I can go back or going forward. And if you have a lot of information, consider also provide a search bar, Because maybe people, let's say people go to Weimar and maybe they just want to see what's Bauhaus and are not interested about classical Weimar. It's just an example. So provide a search bar also could get a better experience. And the navigation. The navigation here again is not about the cosmetics, but about how you go inside your app. So what kind of elements helps a better navigation, a better use of your application. And this is very important to think about how you organize your content. So the number of taps to achieve the information. Again, you walk on the streets and then you're using this app, so you want to find information. So if you have to type a lot or tap a lot to find information, is a very usability fault. So try to stick to no more than 3 taps to achieve the information. And that's also related to what you have the items in your main menu. So it's just go for up to 5. You can get 4 or 3. So think about what is important in your attraction. So what you're going to show it, and make it in the main menu just a few options. And if you tell me, okay, but I have a lot to tell about my city, about my locations, of course, then you can use this what's called hamburger menu and then show the other informations. But try to divide here about what you have, what's the main thing in your app. And then, of course, you can offer more content using other alternatives. And also, it's very common that sometimes you are in the main screen, you have a navigation menu, and then when you change for another section, and then the menu disappears. And then, which means, okay, I have to go back for then going to another place. So instead of this, always make your navigation menu visible all the time. Then it saves a lot of tabs. Which also brings to this one level navigation menu, means try to get your best information at the same level, connect to your main menu, and in case you need more options, and then you can go for this sub-menu navigation. So you can see here in the screens, you have this, for instance, about Weimar, about classical Weimar, about Bauhaus, about World Heritage Sites. So if I just tap there, that's a sub-menu navigation. I can easily change other screens without having the need to go back to previous page for then going back again. So that's a very good alternative that you can do it. And of course, when you have your menu, the menu should be self-explanatory itself. So it always helps to have text and imagery together, and then makes very obvious for your audience what they're looking for. And of course, Android devices usually have even physical back buttons, but not iOS. So when your design, even if you have Android, always think about creating the back button. And it's not a rocket science, but helps a lot in the way you design it. And also the design here is about the visual aspects, the visual treat of the interface. And here talk about the use of colors, imagery, and other visual supports. So what would be the recommendation in this case? And again, make it simple. So use a limited use of colors and simple design with a lot of white space. So when you create a white space around a text, it pops up the text. So instead of having this pollution in your screen, you have more isolated elements that then get more attention. So it's because when I did my research about the market, I saw a lot of apps that using photo as a background, so it's very polluted, very hard to read. And here also, when you walk in the streets, you need a better contrast. So it's very good to use white spaces. And use of icons as a navigation or as other information inside your app. So it makes more clear what it is, and together with the text, reinforce the message, and then you be sure that you don't have any mistakes. And be sure that you make also spaces between the buttons, especially if you consider elderly audience. So you talk about World Heritage Sites, and particularly in Germany, they're very popular among elderly people. And then that's one results from elderly studies to create more spaces between the buttons or clickable items. Makes more easier. And also when you implement apps, in this test, you did one that was using customized markers, another one that using just regular markers that you can see from iOS Maps or from Google Maps, and the users, they felt more familiar for what is regular use about these upside down drop, if you like. So stick for what the standards in the industry, and then you probably have more chance for people to understand what you're doing. And here is the content about how to actually talk about the locations. So talk about the length, you talk about all the interactions you might have about content wise. And one that's very important is using so short text. But then you might think about, okay, but I have a lot to say. You talk about a place who has 300 years old. So I cannot say just one paragraph. I know that. But of course, when I say that using short text is just create one paragraph that summarizes the place. Okay, here is where Bauhaus started, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you have one paragraph, and then you have the option to show more information or expand, and then you can read more. Because maybe you walk on the streets, you have to think about the user, they are using an app, and maybe they just want to check, okay, what is here? Ah, that's the house of Schiller. Okay, I don't want to see it. And then you don't waste of time to reading a lot about it. You just can choose which locations you actually want to read more. So a good alternative here is always using short text with the possibility to expand it. That should be the best approach. And of course, some people forget about this one. That's about information at the start screen. Some apps, when you open it, they show a pop-up image that explain the apps or giving you a welcome message. So you can implement this as much as you can, because it shows the main locations. Here you can do some explanations, and then always you can do it. Don't show this window again. That's it. So then you make sure that people actually understand how the apps work. And of course, you talk about open air spaces that you can move locations, and then of course you should offer tools and routes, but not just a route, but try to make different routes, because sometimes you have tourists in your city. Maybe they just want to be there for the afternoon, maybe they want to be there for a couple of days. So then it's better to create different routes with different length of time, and then you can say, okay, this one you're gonna walk 1 kilometer, this one will be 3 kilometers, this one will be all by time, this one is around 3 hours, and then you can offer different ones according to your audience wish. And again, you talk about short text, not avoid scrolling before, and that's what goes in terms of content. So focus on the essential information. Again, let's say just create one paragraph with a picture and then show about the location, and then you can provide extra ones. But try to always be more focused on when you create the information. And always use aesthetics graphics. Here could be photos, here could be galleries. Because let's say you talk about a urban setting, you have different historical buildings next to each other, but just one of them is actually on UNESCO heritage site. But of course, the city center could be beautiful, could be very historical, and then when you show the picture of the location, makes easier to find which building you're talking about. So always using this to show the locations and then make sure that people actually are in the right building. And consider also the surrounding environment. So it's some people like to use audios, for instance, as audio guide. If you have an audio guide, is one thing, but if you have a regular app that's not audio guide and you put audio, you put video, the people are not going to play that when they walk on the streets. There's a lot of noises, there's a lot of things. So consider that when you think about what you're offering. And another one that's also related to elderly audience is large screen font size or optimize the size. If you said, okay, I don't want to use a bigger font, but maybe you can use the settings a way that you can change the font size. So why not? And especially you talk about walking on the streets, the sun hitting, and when you have a bigger font with a high contrast, could be a better readability. So consider implementing that on your design. And also, when you have boot locations, there's some ways you can do it. Sometimes you can do it in a grid format, or you can do it in a list format. And from the evaluation, the list was the most favorite one because you can see more places in one screen. And which connects to the next one, that's display more information about the location. Let's say here you can see this example here. You have a list. Maybe you can change from alphabetical order or distance order, and then I can see from a GPS location how distant I am from this location. Okay, you are from 700 meters, you are on 1 kilometer, and then maybe I can find the one that's closest to me. So you can give information. If the place has entry time, you can say open now or close now. So you can think about display more preview information about each location. And always allowing personalization configuration. As I talked before about the text, you can do the text, or even like this. Okay, I have these articles that usually is just one paragraph, but maybe I know I'm going to read all, so maybe you can have an option that, okay, expand all the articles, or giving GPS notifications, or different distance units. Some people use miles, some people use kilometers. So this kind of customization always helps in your app. And when you have a pop-up information, also try to make it in the center of your screen and not on the bottom. So from our tests, we saw that people really prefer more when they pop up in the center. That's they are in the center of the focus. But also there's a lot of other elements that you could not test in the prototypes because of limitations of the technology, but you can see that it was very heavily recommended from the literature review. So there are here some recommendations that you should also consider when you apply your design. For instance, when you go back, to prevent information loss, especially if you have to choose a lot of things before going to the, let's say you are in your third interaction with screens, and then you're going to go back to the second one, and then you don't need to go back to the home page and start again. So, and also provide action feedback. Let's say if you have to upload something, show a bar or a loading bar. So anything that happens, you show a visual about what's going on, and then people could wait. Okay, it's downloading a video or download an imagery, and then you can see the bar, and then you know how much you have to wait. And also this one that's clickable buttons with tactile feedback is very good for, especially for elderly. So if you have things on your screen, you can make it very bright, or you can make a sound that shows that you did something, that gives you a tactical feedback. And also provide location-based notifications. So you talk about different buildings, so maybe you can say, okay, vibrate my phone when I'm close to a point of interest that I want to see it. And also when you work with maps, try to use visual clues about what you already saw it and what you still have to go. And also the way that you work with medium features and media, so that's more focused about what kind of media you should use or what's recommended. And of course, photos or galleries, that's very useful. So even galleries, let's say I'm talking about a castle that's part of these heritage places. And then of course I can show the facade of the castle to identify it, but maybe I can show inside some main pictures, and maybe if you have an interest fee, and then I can see if worth or not my visit inside. So you can think about making it more attractive, why showing reasons why you should go inside, for instance, just example. And again, some people also like to use the map as a static one. And here, recommendation is always use GPS ones, because all the smartphones, they have GPS now, and it's so simple to use. You can use Google Maps APIs with customized maps. So there's a lot of different tools you can use it. That's very simple to implement, and why not using GPS as much as you can. But of course, you talk about World Heritage sites, so there's some specific content that could also be applied specifically just for World Heritage sites. And one is displaying the UNESCO logo, the UNESCO World Heritage Site logo, because it's a very hard thing to be granted this, and the recognition is a very bureaucratic process. So if you have it, so try to use as much as you can, because if you are working with a World Heritage Site from UNESCO, you are allowed to use their logo. It's kind of accreditation, and you should play that around in your app. And also provide an about page. So talk about why this place is historically important to be recognized as a World Heritage Site. So you can add that as an extra inside your app, but do it. So talk about it. And especially curated content. So you talk about a lot of content, and you live in a society you have an overload of information, so try to then say what's important about this location. So curate the content wisely when implementing your app for World Heritage Sites. And this is not a recommendation, but just a reminder that, okay, always go for the both most popular operating system. So, for instance, when I was looking for the apps in Germany, a lot of them was just for Android, or some were just for iOS. So if you really want to be serious about it, you have to do it at least in both operating systems. And some final considerations about this article in particular. So, of course, you can think about, okay, what is said could be applied for any touristic site and not just a World Heritage site. And that is kind of true. If you talk about open air locations that you have to go for different locations, sure, it could be applied for that. But of course, you have very specific recommendations for World Heritage sites as well. But it's important to say that that was a research, so you have time and budget constraints. So the ideal scenario is continuing implementing these apps in the official market and continuing tests with different demographics and different age groups. That will be the recommendation here. But one thing that I believe that was very successful in the way you build this app is actually adding more elderly friend features and also thinking about different disabilities or special needs. So that's when you do a more inclusive elements in your app, you just adding more positive or more usability for all the users. So does not mean that you have elderly features could not be used for younger generations, so that's totally fine. So try to always include more inclusivity in your design. So, and here's the reference that I use in this very presentation. So of course they are in the article as well. So here's what was used just in this presentation. So guys, I want to say thank you and gracias Valencia. And again, if you have some follow-up, please contact me by my email that's showing the screen, and let's continue this conversation. So thank you guys, and see you around.